Millions of people around the world gathered in front of their televisions. They held their breath as history was about to be made. For the first time ever, a human being was preparing to step onto another world. Within moments, those footsteps would become one of the most unforgettable events in human history. But how did humanity reach this extraordinary moment? Why did we decide to go to the moon? And how did one of the most dangerous missions ever attempted become one of our greatest achievements? Today, we're taking you on the incredible journey that changed history forever. In the 1950s, the world was divided between two powerful nations. On one side stood the United States. On the other stood the Soviet Union. Their rivalry extended far beyond politics and military power. It became a fierce competition to conquer space. Then, in 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the world by launching Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. For the first time in history, a man-made object was circling our planet. The United States realized it was falling behind. The space race had officially begun. Both nations believed that whoever mastered space technology would shape the future of science, technology, and global influence. In 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human ever to travel into space. Once again, the Soviet Union had reached another historic milestone. The pressure on the United States grew even stronger. That same year, President John F. Kennedy delivered one of the most famous speeches in history. He challenged America with an ambitious goal. We choose to go to the moon. He promised that before the decade ended, the United States would land a man on the moon and bring him safely back to Earth. At the time, many people believed the goal was impossible. Computers were far less powerful than even today's smartphones. No one had ever traveled beyond Earth orbit. Every piece of technology required for such a mission still had to be invented. Yet thousands of engineers, scientists, technicians, and astronauts accepted the challenge. They worked day and night, pushing the limits of science and engineering. Humanity was preparing for a journey unlike anything ever attempted. And this was only the beginning. President Kennedy had set a clear goal: land a human on the moon and bring them safely back to Earth. But there was one major problem. No one knew exactly how to accomplish such an enormous task. To make this dream a reality, NASA launched one of the largest scientific and engineering projects in history, the Apollo program. More than 400,000 people worked on the project. Thousands of companies, universities, and research centers joined forces with a single mission: take humanity to the moon. The first challenge was building a rocket powerful enough to escape Earth's gravity. The answer was the Saturn V. Standing 110 meters, 363 feet tall, it was as high as a 36-story building. Fully fueled, it weighed nearly 3,000 tons. Its 5 massive engines generated over 7.5 million pounds of thrust, making it the most powerful rocket ever successfully flown at the time. When Saturn V lifted off, the ground shook beneath it. The thunder of its engines could be heard for miles. It wasn't just a rocket. It was one of the greatest engineering achievements humanity had ever created. But even the world's most powerful rocket wasn't enough. The astronauts themselves had to be prepared for conditions no human had ever experienced. Their training was incredibly demanding. They spent countless hours inside flight simulators, practicing every possible emergency. They trained underwater to simulate the moon's low gravity. They flew aboard special aircraft that created short periods of weightlessness. Every movement, every procedure, every possible failure was practiced over and over again. Because in space, even the smallest mistake could cost lives. Finally, NASA selected the 3 astronauts for the historic mission: Neil Armstrong, the mission commander; Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot; and Michael Collins, the command module pilot. Each brought years of experience, exceptional skill, and remarkable courage. Together, they were about to attempt something no human had ever done before. Then came the morning of July 16, 1969. More than 1 million spectators gathered near the launch site in Florida. Millions more watched on television around the world. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. The engines ignited. A massive cloud of fire and smoke surrounded the rocket. Slowly, the giant Saturn V began to rise from the launch pad. Within seconds, humanity's greatest journey had officially begun. As the Saturn V climbed higher into the sky, the mission entered its next critical phase. Just a few minutes after liftoff, the rocket's first stage had burned through its fuel and separated exactly as planned. Then the second stage ignited. Minutes later, it too detached, leaving the third stage to push the spacecraft even farther into space. Everything was happening with remarkable precision. Soon, Apollo 11 reached Earth orbit. After one complete orbit around the planet, the astronauts received the command they had been waiting for. The third stage engine fired one final time, accelerating the spacecraft to nearly 39,000 kilometers per hour, fast enough to escape Earth's gravity. Apollo 11 was now on its way to the moon, beginning a journey of almost 384,000 kilometers. For the next 3 days, the crew traveled through the silent darkness of space. Inside the spacecraft, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins carefully monitored every system. They checked navigation, communications, oxygen levels, and electrical equipment. Even the smallest malfunction could jeopardize the entire mission. Outside the windows, Earth grew smaller and smaller. The blue planet slowly became a bright marble floating in the endless blackness of space. For the astronauts, it was a breathtaking reminder of how small and fragile our world truly is. Finally, Apollo 11 reached the moon. The spacecraft fired its engine once again, slowing just enough to be captured by the moon's gravity. The crew had successfully entered lunar orbit. Now came the most dangerous part of the mission. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin climbed into the lunar module, known by its call sign, Eagle. Meanwhile, Michael Collins remained alone aboard the command module Columbia, orbiting the moon and waiting for their return. The two spacecraft separated. Slowly, Eagle began its descent toward the lunar surface. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Until suddenly, warning alarms appeared on the onboard computer. 1201, 1202. No one had expected these error codes. Mission control in Houston fell silent. Were these warnings serious enough to abort the landing? Engineers had only seconds to make a decision. After a rapid analysis, they delivered the message, "We're go, continue the landing." But another problem quickly appeared. The computer was guiding Eagle toward a field filled with large boulders and dangerous craters. Landing there could destroy the spacecraft. Without hesitation, Neil Armstrong took manual control. Fuel was running dangerously low. Every passing second increased the risk. Only a few seconds of fuel remained. The entire world watched in suspense. Then, at last, a safe, flat landing site came into view. Armstrong gently lowered Eagle onto the moon's surface. A few moments later, his calm voice echoed across Earth. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." For the first time in history, humanity had successfully landed on another world. The Eagle had landed safely, but the mission was far from over. The moment the entire world had been waiting for was finally about to happen. Inside the lunar module, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin completed their final safety checks. They carefully put on their life support backpacks and sealed their spacesuits. Then, the cabin was slowly depressurized. Armstrong opened the hatch and carefully climbed down the narrow ladder. Hundreds of millions of people around the world watched in complete silence. Step by step, he descended toward the lunar surface. When he reached the final rung, he paused for a brief moment. Then, he placed his left foot onto the moon. It was July 20th, 1969. For the first time in history, a human being was standing on another world. At that unforgettable moment, Neil Armstrong spoke the words that would echo through history. "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Just a few minutes later, Buzz Aldrin followed him onto the surface. Looking around, the astronauts saw a landscape unlike anything on Earth. The sky was completely black, even though the sun was shining brightly. There was no atmosphere, no wind, no clouds, and no sound. Only complete silence. Every step they took sent fine lunar dust drifting into the air before it slowly settled back to the ground. Because the moon's gravity is only about 1/6 that of Earth's, walking felt more like hopping than running. During their time on the surface, the astronauts carried out several important scientific experiments. They collected rocks and soil samples that would later help scientists better understand the moon's history. They installed scientific instruments designed to study moonquakes, solar wind, and the moon's environment. Some of these experiments continued sending valuable data back to Earth for years. The astronauts also planted the American flag on the lunar surface. Many people believe the flag was waving in the wind, but that's impossible. The moon has no atmosphere, so there is no wind. The flag only appeared to ripple because it was supported by a horizontal rod and moved as the astronauts positioned it. After spending about 2.5 hours exploring the lunar surface, Armstrong and Aldrin had completed one of the greatest scientific missions in history. But one final challenge remained. They still had to leave the moon and make it safely back home. After more than 2 hours on the lunar surface, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin completed their mission. They carefully packed nearly 22 kilograms, 48 pounds, of moon rocks and lunar soil into the lunar module. These precious samples would help scientists unlock the moon's ancient history for decades to come. Now it was time for the most nerve-wracking part of the mission: leaving the moon. Unlike the launch from Earth, there would be no second chance. The lunar module's ascent engine had never been tested in space before. If it failed to ignite, Armstrong and Aldrin would be stranded on the moon forever. Back on Earth, Mission Control waited in complete silence. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The engine roared to life. The upper half of the lunar module, called the ascent stage, lifted off from the moon, leaving the lower half behind forever. Slowly, Eagle climbed higher and higher above the lunar surface. The hardest part was over. Meanwhile, Michael Collins continued orbiting the moon alone aboard the command module Columbia. For nearly a full day, he had waited for his crewmates to return. Using precise calculations and careful maneuvering, the two spacecraft moved closer together. Finally, they docked successfully. Armstrong and Aldrin climbed back into Columbia with the valuable lunar samples. The Eagle had completed its mission. It was then released and left to drift in lunar orbit. Apollo 11 was ready for the long journey home. Over the next 3 days, the astronauts traveled back toward Earth. But one final obstacle remained: re-entering Earth's atmosphere. The spacecraft approached Earth at nearly 40,000 kilometers per hour. As it slammed into the atmosphere, friction heated the outside of the capsule to around 2,700 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt most metals. Only the specially designed heat shield protected the crew from the extreme temperatures. For several tense minutes, radio communication was lost as a layer of superheated plasma surrounded the spacecraft. Then, the blackout ended. Mission Control heard the astronauts' voices once again. Relief spread across the room. Soon afterward, the first parachutes deployed, then 3 giant main parachutes opened, slowing the capsule for its final descent. On July 24, 1969, Apollo 11 splashed safely into the Pacific Ocean. Within minutes, recovery crews reached the capsule and welcomed the astronauts home. Humanity's greatest journey had come to a successful end. The Apollo 11 mission was over, but its impact had only just begun. Around the world, people celebrated one of the greatest achievements in human history. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins returned home as heroes, welcomed by millions and honored across the globe. Yet Apollo 11 was not the end of humanity's journey to the moon. Between 1969 and 1972, NASA successfully landed astronauts on the moon during 6 Apollo missions. In total, 12 astronauts walked across the lunar surface, conducting experiments and collecting valuable scientific data. Together, they brought back more than 382 kilograms, 842 pounds, of moon rocks and soil. These samples revealed that the moon is about 4.5 billion years old and provided scientists with remarkable clues about the early history of both the moon and Earth. The scientific instruments left behind by the astronauts continued to transmit data for years, helping researchers better understand the moon's interior, its environment, and its relationship with our planet. After the final Apollo mission in 1972, no human returned to the moon. The reason wasn't a lack of interest. The missions were incredibly expensive, political priorities had changed, and attention shifted toward new goals, including the space shuttle program. For more than 50 years, the footprints left by the Apollo astronauts have remained untouched on the silent lunar surface. Today, humanity is preparing to return. NASA's Artemis program, together with international partners, aims to send astronauts back to the moon and establish a long-term human presence there. This time, the goal is far greater than planting another flag. Scientists hope to build lunar bases, explore the moon's resources, and use it as a stepping stone for future missions to Mars. The next generation of explorers may spend weeks, or even months, living and working on the moon. What once seemed impossible is becoming reality once again. The first moon landing was more than a technological achievement. It was proof that when humanity dares to dream, works together, and refuses to give up, even the impossible can become possible. The footsteps left by Apollo 11 are still there today, a lasting reminder that curiosity, courage, and determination can carry us farther than we ever imagined. And perhaps, humanity's next giant leap will begin on the moon once again. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next adventure into the unknown.